Per the requirements of the Code of Virginia, the agenda and all supporting documentation were posted on the HRTPO website. For public review, and electronic copies of this information were provided to FTAC members and other interested parties. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The live stream is available for viewing on the Regional Connection YouTube channel, and the recording will be made available via the HRTPO website. The general public were provided an opportunity to comment on today's agenda in advance of the meeting via two options. Option one, members of the public were invited to email comments to the Freight Advisory Committee. Option two, members of the public were invited to call into a dedicated phone line where comments could be recorded. No comments were received via either option as of 48 hours before the meeting. Before we begin today's meeting, a few housekeeping rules and reminders. Please keep your phones and computers muted except for when you're providing input. Please identify yourself by name, the locality, or the agency you represent when you provide input. And please do the same should you provide a motion or a second. All votes taken today must be made by roll call vote and will be recorded in the minutes. And again, thank you for your cooperation and patience, and we will now turn it over for attendance.
Great, thank you, Pavitra. Starting with committee members, Mike Abbott.
Present.
Thank you, Mike. Marcia Capelli.
This is Diane Grigsby in for Marcia Capelli.
Okay, thank you. Larry Ewan. Rick Morris. David White.
Present.
Thank you, David. Bob Evely.
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And Cannon Moss.
Here.
Thank you, Ken. In terms of interested parties, Carl Jackson.
I'm here.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Carl. Jeremy Latimer. And Ivan Rucker. And in terms of VPA and TPO staff, Barb Nelson.
Hey, good afternoon. I think I saw that Mike Todd was maybe logged in for Jeremy Latimer.
Okay.
RPT.
Let me go back up there. Are you here, Michael?
Yep, Mike is here.
Great, thanks, Mike. Let me see, I got you, Barb. Karen McPherson?
Yep, I'm here.
Thanks, Karen. And then TPO staff, Pavitra is here, Dale, I'm here, and Sam is here. Is there anybody else in attendance that I missed?
Did you need to put my name in for Marcia Capelli? This is Diane Grigsby.
Yeah, I will go ahead and do that once I can mute the screen.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
No
Thanks.
problem. Okay, last call. Was there anybody else that needs to be added to the attendance list? Looks like Ivan is present based on that message. Okay, thank you. Once again, we do not have a chair in attendance today, so we will need to appoint a chair for this meeting. Once again, we talked with David White, and he was gracious enough for hopefully one more time to handle the chair role for this meeting. So, David, are you still willing to chair this meeting?
One more time.
That silence scared me there, Dave. All right. So unless anybody else really wants to take the role for this particular meeting, we'll need to have a motion and a second and a vote on that for David to be the temporary chair for this meeting.
So moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Great. Any opposition to David chairing this meeting? Hearing none, the gavel is yours, David.
Thank you. All right, so welcome again, everybody. Good to see each of you virtually, and it appears we're getting closer and closer to the days when we'll be able to gather again. That's a good thing. Keep getting your shots, encouraging those around you to do so. So next on the agenda, approval of the agenda. So everybody should have received the information, a link for the materials for the meeting, including the agenda for the meeting. Do we have any amendments to the agenda? Any questions about the agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Thank you. And I'll call for the vote. Any?
We don't need to actually take a vote on that, just need to see if anybody opposes the motion.
All right, very good. So then we move on to the approval of the minutes of the last meeting, February 23, 2021. Again, distributed ahead of time. Does anybody require time to review the minutes? Not hearing any. I'll call for a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Move to accept.
All right, I'll take that as a second. Any discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote on approval of the minutes.
Same thing for the minutes, David. We just need to ask if there's any opposition to it.
All right, perfect. So with that, then, very glad to have with us today. Let's before we go on to Bob Crum, let's talk about FTAC membership. That's next on the agenda. And do you have that item?
Yeah, I've got this, and it's just really just a quick 30-second update on that. You may remember back at the February meeting, the FTAC invited Bob Eagley and Cannon Moss to join the FTAC. We needed HRTPO board action to make that official, and that occurred at their April meeting. So as of the middle of April, Bob and Cannon are official members of the FTAC. So welcome aboard. I do want to add on to that. We are up to 7 official members now, and the bylaws that we'll hopefully approve here later in the meeting, we're looking at having a minimum of 9 members, if not more. So hopefully we can continue reaching out and add a couple more members here as the year goes on.
Yeah, so maybe first, since I am privileged to have the opportunity to chair this meeting, let me offer an official welcome and congratulations from the seat of the chair to Bob and Cannon on your appointment to the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee. And a thank you as well for your willingness to serve. I know you serve because you recognize that it is important for freight interests to be represented in the transportation planning of the region. And you join the rest of the FTAC members in that. But it's also a commitment of your time and your intellect to do so, and so we're grateful for that. So again, with that, from the seat of the chair, I extend an official congratulations and thank you. So now moving on to next item on the agenda, Federal Infrastructure Program. And we're privileged to have with us Bob Crum, Executive Director of the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization, as well as the Planning District Commission. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, I feel like you could probably provide the presentation I'm about to provide, but that's a good thing. So FTAC members, it's a privilege to be with you today. What I'd like to share with you all today is an update on what a group of regional organizations and regional partners have been working on over the last several months to best position the Hampton Roads region to take advantage of any federal infrastructure package that might be rolled out and approved by our Congress over the next probably 4 to 7 months. I kid about David because David has been in the trenches with us side by side, and frankly, exhibited some great leadership in standing up and saying, boy, maybe if we can come together, this could be a tremendous opportunity for the region. So what I'm going to discuss with you today, we've had excellent partnership with the Virginia Maritime Association. Barb Nelson, Kathy Vick has been right there with us side by side. The port has been a tremendous partner through this process. So what I'm going to share today through a bit of a PowerPoint is what we've learned over the last 2 months, probably, what we've learned talking with every member of our federal delegation, House of Representatives and Senators, at least once, sometimes twice. David, we have another meeting with Senator Warner Friday, I know, that we'll be continuing this conversation. And even discussions we've had with high-level U.S. Department of Transportation officials in Washington, D.C. about what we might expect and how we can best prepare our region. So, David, can you hear me okay before I share screen? Am I coming through all right? Very good. Thank you, sir. I'm going to go ahead and try to share screen here, Keith. Let's see if I'm able to do. Keith, did that come up okay?
Yes, it did.
Okay, excellent. Let's see if I could just move some things out of the way here. I'll get my slideshow going. I apologize. Okay, sorry, operator error on my part. Did that come up okay, Keith?
Yeah, yes, it did. Looks good.
Okay, fantastic. So I'd like to share with you some information on what we're doing. Again, to best position our region for this federal infrastructure package. What I'm going to provide for you is something that Doug Smith from the Hampton Roads Alliance and I have provided in a couple of presentations. But the essence of what we're going to be talking about is that if we can think about preparing for a federal infrastructure package, it makes the most sense for us to be together regionally for the big projects. Rather than individual jurisdictions going in and doing specific asks, we really thought that there would be value of coming together and doing a regional package. Now, I want to stress that doesn't mean individual jurisdictions aren't going to have more local projects, but as the entity that manages the HRTPO and the HRPDC, we're very fortunate that our regional priorities have been established by those regional boards, and we think we're going to be most competitive by positioning ourselves on the larger, bigger transformational projects by having a uniform regional statement. How much? The next question is, what's that infrastructure package going to be? We really don't know. You hear numbers like we do, 1 million to 2 trillion. Just let me put this in perspective a second. If it would be $1 trillion, our fair share would be about $5 billion on a population basis. We also know that there's a couple bills that are establishing regional competition for innovation centers, about $80 billion over a decade to do 9 to 15 innovation centers around the nation. We think Hampton Roads is very well positioned related to our shipbuilding and repair, related to the things going on at Jefferson Lab, even at Langley, and I could go on, but we really think that we have opportunity to position ourselves as an innovation center. But we think to do this and do this correctly, we really need to effectively tell the story that is the Hampton Roads story. This is a slide I'm really proud of, and you're going to look on here and see many organizations on here. These are 17 organizations that have come together in a united manner and contributed and offered their support for our regionally prioritized project list. Some of them are on the FTAC here. I mentioned the Virginia Maritime Association and David White's leadership. The Virginia Port Authority is here. Of course, the TPO and the HRPDC and on and on. So this is something that we're very proud of, that we're able to come together, standing together as one region and expressing to our federal delegation that these are, in fact, our regional priorities. Now, where we think that we're very much well positioned, and frankly, I'll talk to this a little more, but what we're hearing from our federal delegation is, guys, you're so far ahead of other regions. is we can draw on the work of our HRTPO and of our HRPDC and their approved plans and studies to pull our regional priorities. Del Stith has managed the long-range transportation plan for the HRTPO. As you're all aware, in March, the HRTPO endorsed the next set of regional priority projects. We have those regional transportation priorities as identified by the HRTPO through that cooperative planning process that we can express as our regional priorities. For the last 5 years, we've done a regional legislative agenda that's been approved by the 47-member HRPDC board as well as the HRTPO board. That regional legislative agenda sets priorities such as the widening of I-64 the whole way from Williamsburg to Richmond. It establishes priorities around broadband. It establishes those priorities around sea level rise, and I could go on, but we're fortunate that that legislative agenda exists. We have our regional fiber broadband initiative that's been endorsed by the HRPDC. Our boards have offered regional support for extending the Capitol Trail through our region. And even related to sea level rise construction projects, we have projects identified by city manager offices in several of our cities that we can bring forward as potential projects to be considered for a package. So this is our advantage. Our existing regional plans, regional legislative agendas, and regional coordination, we truly believe places us ahead of other metropolitan regions. The other thing that does is the little flag at the bottom there, and we're calling ourselves those 17 jurisdictions, the Hampton Roads Infrastructure Coalition. When I'm done, I'll let David talk about that a little bit, but it's just been so impressive to see so many organizations come together in a cohesive way. It's something that we're really, really excited about. So what are we looking for in terms of preparing projects? Well, clearly, if we're going to get an infrastructure package, they want to see projects that are ready to go. They want to see projects that achieve multiple outcomes. So what do we mean by that? Well, it's going to become very obvious, I think, as we continue to monitor the new administration that they're really looking for collective impact projects, projects that address transportation, mobility, and safety, projects that move freight, projects that deal with issues such as social equity, projects that benefit our low and moderate income residents, projects that perhaps look at transportation in a new and innovative way and different ways to move people around our communities. They would like to see us leverage federal investment with other money. Let me pause there a second. Clearly, Hampton Roads, our time, we're due, right? We're the region that got frustrated with the lack of federal money. This is a region that has self-taxed itself, all of our residents paying an extra gas tax and an extra sales and use tax. And with that money, we've come together as 17 local governments to regionally advance over $5.3 billion of federal transportation investment, improving the interstate highway network in Hampton Roads. We believe we have the second largest interstate highway construction program in the country, and it has zero federal dollars in it. We think the investment that we've shown over the last 5 years and the $5 billion that we placed into the federal interstate system should be rewarded and recognized. So we think that puts us at a tremendous advantage, and we're hopeful that our investment and foresight will be recognized. Job creation is going to be important. Issues related to climate change and sea level rise will be important. I already mentioned the social equity issue, and projects that are of national and regional significance. And certainly we believe that all the projects that we're going to talk about today related to supporting our port, which is a national asset, related to supporting our military, which is also a national asset. All of these projects we think are great candidates. Now, as a public planner, I can't be involved, obviously, with engaging a consultant, but some of our partners, such as the Alliance, the Hampton Roads Alliance and Reinvent Hampton Roads, has engaged Clark Hill. I know David White has had great success working with Clark Hill through the VMA. This is Kevin Kelly. He has been working with members of our partnership, and really has helped connect us in a very important way to the goings on in Washington, D.C. There's a list of just some of the meetings we've done with all the members of our federal delegation. We continue to do this. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the requests that we've already submitted through some opportunities that have been identified for us. We prepared a white paper to try to tell the Hampton Roads story in 2 to 3 pages. The theme is that we're uniting our region for economic growth. We are asking for 4 actions from Washington, D.C. Number 1, it's time for this country to go big on infrastructure. Last year, when we looked at the infra program, there was just over $850 million available for the entire country. We have over $5.3 billion with a B under construction in Hampton Roads alone, and the HRBT project at $3.8 billion alone far exceeds that, just one project. We need our nation to go big on infrastructure, and we really think that's critical. Secondly, we really think we need credit for the FTAC, our regional money that we've invested to date, over $5.3 billion. We think that our military benefits from all of our projects, as well as our port benefits, should be given federal presence. And we really stress that, we have a projects inventory based on regional consensus, and we think that's something that we really, really ought to be given credit for. And we're talking to them about Hampton Roads, and maybe for the first time, I think, trying to effectively tell the story about the critical importance of our region. So our project inventory is diverse. It includes transportation road projects approved by the HRTPO, active transportation and transit projects approved and endorsed by the HRTPO and HRT, technology endorsed by the PDC, sea level rise and resiliency, rail, and port. So I'd like to go over with the FTAC some of our projects. So this first tranche of projects are our transportation road projects. If they look familiar, they should. These are the regional priority projects that have been approved by the HRTPO. We start with the widening of I-64 from the end of our current improvement program near Williamsburg, exit 234. We have a 29-mile stretch extending from exit 234 to exit 205 near 295 in Richmond. We have $635 million. We're hoping we can get that below $600 million in cost. We think this is a very important project, important to our military, important to our port, important to connecting the 757 and RVA regions, important to our tourism economy. So we're really hopeful that this can be well positioned. From there, you'll see other projects like improvements, the next phase of the 264-64 interchange. Improvements are widening of 664 from Bowers Hill up to College Drive, including the Bowers Hill interchange. Widening to 264 from Wichita to Independence, including an upgrade of the Independence interchange. Denby Boulevard interchange on I-64 in the peninsula. The VA 164 widening from Pinner's Point. The I-64 464 loop ramps. The remaining phases of that 264 interchange, and even improvements to Route 58 to help support our freight movement, as well as planning for that Craney connector work that was very important to the Port of Virginia in our discussions. We have active transportation projects like the Capitol Trail and Birthplace of America Trail. We want to take that 50-mile trail that extends from Richmond to Williamsburg and take it well over 100 miles of a continuous walking and biking path. Our number one transit project in collaboration with HRT is the Peninsula High Capacity Transit Program. I'll talk about that a little more. We've collaborated very closely with William Harrell at HRT and even have submitted an early phase of this for funding consideration. On a technology standpoint, we have our regional fiber network beginning on the south side, interconnecting Virginia Beach with Norfolk and Portsmouth and Chesapeake and Suffolk. And we want to extend that over the peninsula as well. But for $100 million, we can build out that regional fiber network. It's going to really connect to those subsea cables that will land into Virginia Beach and spread that fast service around our community. We have a variety of sea level rise projects. I won't go over those in detail with you today, but a lot of work's been identified to identify these projects. Rail projects like the Terminal Boulevard Rail Crossing or the Suffolk Railroad Study, projects that have been identified as regional priorities, and projects related to our port like the main channel dredging, the PMT upgrade, the Elizabeth River Southern Branch deepening, planning, engineering, and design work, and even Craney Island eastward expansion. So all told, we easily identify very quickly over $7.3 billion of need. So where does that leave us? So what we're being told is that the soonest action could be taken on an infrastructure bill would be July, but most of our delegation is telling us that if they were betting people, it would be this fall. Still to be determines the size of the package, the buckets. As you know, typically what happens is, we get money identified by Congress, approved through the federal process. That money gets placed in the priority bucket areas, then gets sent on to the federal agencies who announces notice of funding availability, and then we position ourselves to apply. So we're going to monitor what buckets that money goes into, how it's divided, how we can best be competitive. We also are looking at strategies for how we use funding for money that's already flown down from the federal government. The American Rescue Plan, for instance, many of our Southside jurisdictions are looking at using that money for our fiber ring network, and that could be a project that we can fund with that group of money. So we're really carefully looking at those monies. Before I open it up to questions, Mr. Chairman, I just want to mention one thing. So what I've talked about so far is the bigger, grander federal infrastructure program. I can tell you that, set the Senate aside a second, your House of Representatives in Congress, all your House of Representatives have each been provided $20 million for which they can apply to smaller projects than these big ones that I discussed through what they call the House appropriations process. So what's been happening in quite a whirlwind over the last 4 weeks is our representatives have reached out to us and they've asked us. My first call was, and David, I think we both had a good laugh over this, but Bob, what infrastructure projects can you build for $100,000? Well, no, that's difficult to do. But we talked to them and they've asked us for projects in that $3 to $4 million range. I can tell you that we have had House of Representatives submit projects that the Suffolk Connector, which would be a major, a very important project down there, Suffolk, that would help with an at-grade rail crossing and avoid that conflict. That has been submitted for us by Representative McEachin. I can tell you that Representative Scott has submitted sections of our Virginia Capitol Trail extension in Newport News. That project's been submitted. And a few other select projects related to some of our other project lists. So that's not a lot of money, but it's perhaps a little bit of money that we can use to kickstart some of these efforts that were successful. I'll just conclude by saying, and I'll quote Senators Kane and Warner, Senator Kane went on WHRO and made a statement, and his statement was that the Hampton Roads region is leaps and bounds ahead of every other region in Virginia. No other region in Virginia has been able to come together and form this list of regional priorities. The senators and our representatives have been very complimentary of this region for doing that. And we're hopeful that if we can stay together and continue this good work, that we can best position our region to have a chance to compete, to see if we can't bring some of this money home. So, David, sorry for the length if I went too long there. Why don't I turn it back over to you, sir, and see if you have any questions or comments to add before we open up discussion.
I have a couple of comments I'll add, but first open it up for any questions and discussion by the committee members. Anybody? Well, Bob covered a lot of information there, and I hope it's apparent to the committee members. I hope a couple of things are apparent to the committee members. One, that how quickly and how well regional interests have come together to get behind a unified package of priorities that can be held up and advocated for. I have not seen so many regional groups come together so quickly around something as I have seen here. And I hope something else will be evident to you, is that a lot of the projects that are in this package that Bob went over have direct ties to the flow of freight through our region. And as we all know, affects the economic competitiveness of our region and the economic well-being of the region. And I hope that you will see the evidence of past work of the FTAC in the identification of those projects that are important to freight movement, that are listed as priorities for this region. Now, in the past work that the FTAC has done and the TPO has done, that work was not done with a potential $2 trillion infrastructure package coming down from Washington in mind. But it's because of the work that has been done in the past that we are ahead of other regions, and these projects that are important to freight and our economic competitiveness are right there primed for federal funding. So again, because the work that Bob and his team have done over at the TPO, getting consensus from the mayors and chairs to reach agreement around regional priorities, because those regional transportation priorities include freight, we are in a very good position moving forward. So those are my comments. I'll open again just in case anybody did have a last minute question for Bob before we let you go. Okay, hearing them. Bob, thanks for your time, and thanks for all the good work that y'all are doing, and I'll see you on Friday, if not before.
Yes, sir. Thank you, David. Before my next meeting's at 2, I'm going to stay with you and just listen in on the briefing. I believe Keith's going to be giving. I think it's the next item, right, Keith?
All right, it's a public meeting. I'll let you do that. All right, next up on the agenda, the Hampton Roads Highway Access to from Northwest and South Study. HRTPO staff. Sounds, Keith, like that's you.
Yeah, and that's definitely a mouthful. Bob will start. He'll do a quick introduction on this topic, and then I'll wrap it up talking a little bit more about the study and some of the next steps.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Keith. So I think everybody, I'm going to state some things that are just the obvious, right? As we go out and we try to market Hampton Roads to the country and to the world, is anybody else just getting tired of the old characterization that they say we live on the longest cul-de-sac in the nation, right? It's just one of those things that it just wears on you after a while. Many of you have been doing this a lot longer than me. So what we want to do in our work program for next year is try to put some data around what the best strategy is for how we connect our Hampton Road 757 region to outside market areas. How we connect to the I-95 corridor, how we do that in the most efficient way, how we do that with redundancy so that we have multiple ways to connect, and how we do that in a way that takes advantage of how we invest a limited set of dollars that we have for that investment. So we think there's some exciting opportunities. I already mentioned the 64 gap. We're working some really important things on that effort. We think there's some great opportunities on the 58 corridor. You all hear the conversation about I-87. But our concern is that if you do a little bit of everything, we're not gonna finish, right? So how do we best bring with the data, Barb Nelson and David, where's the freight moving now, right? Where's the freight moving? How do we best facilitate that movement? Taking an analytical approach with this, including FTAC in this, to really inform our region in a good conversation about how we move forward. So Keith, with that intro, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Bob. I'm going to share my screen here. Looks like that worked. So as Bob said, the impetus of this study is looking at how we access Hampton Roads, how are we currently doing it, how might we do it in the future, and really there's almost an emphasis in the study. You've heard, I'm sure most of you have heard discussion about I-87 in North Carolina and connecting the Raleigh region with Hampton Roads. And North Carolina's position of creating I-87 to serve Eastern North Carolina and then come up through Chesapeake to connect the two regions. Whereas some of our member jurisdictions, especially in the western part of the region, may be a little bit more concerned about that, and maybe more behind Route 58 and improvements in that area. So this led to discussions both internally in our office and obviously with many of our stakeholders throughout the region. And so based on that, we're going to be doing a study here in the next fiscal year that starts July 1, looking at these gateways and how we access or how we arrive into and leave Hampton Roads, and what might be some of the best projects in terms of a bang for the buck that we could do to improve these gateways to our region. So what I've put on the screen here is a draft of what we're including in our Unified Planning Work Program for the next fiscal year. Looking at what at this point we think the study will look like, but obviously this can change based on conversations we have both with this group and some of our other committees moving forward. But what the main goal of it is this line right here, and that's looking at, based on limited transportation funds, what are some of the best improvements that we can do to improve the gateways to our region. So in terms of the work elements that we've proposed so far, one of the main things we want to look at is how our trucks, and not just port trucks, but all trucks, how do they access our region? How do they leave our region? What are some of the origins and destinations of our region, and what makes the most sense in terms of how they would access or leave our region? So we want to quantify that and look at some of that information, and then also total vehicle volumes. How are they accessing our region? And then based on that, we also want to look at some travel times. So for example, if we're traveling from here to Raleigh, for example, what corridor might make the most sense both today, or if you improved them to limited access roadways, what would make the most sense in terms of the best travel times for traveling between Hampton Roads and Raleigh. We also plan to look at some of these planned improvements, some of the costs for each corridor, and then do kind of a benefit cost analysis so we can prioritize these corridors based on what the best impact would be for our region at hopefully the lowest cost. As part of this too, we'll also look at a few other measures. We have listed here a couple examples with safety and also economic development. This list obviously can grow based on comments that we're receiving from these various groups. But at this point, we wanted to just let the FTAC know that this study was coming online here in the next couple months. See if we can get some feedback from you, certain things you might think you would like for us to look at as part of this study. And also to let you know that as we develop the study here throughout the next fiscal year, we'll definitely keep the FTAC involved and let you see some of our preliminary results so that you can provide valuable feedback as we complete the study over the next year. So at this point, that's all I had to present on it, and just wanted to ask if there was any feedback at this point or any questions. And obviously, if you come up with any ideas in the next days, weeks, or months, please feel free to email me and let me know, and we'd be happy to incorporate some of that stuff into the study.
Questions?
Hey Keith, how you doing? This is Ivan, Federal Highway. It's kind of
Yeah.
dialing. Hey, is your focus here primarily on surface transportation? I see that gets that the under the background where it reads the main highway linking Hampton Roads to the outside. Were there any discussions about expanding the idea of how the Hampton Roads region through its port facilities and port capacity connects Virginia to the world?
I can say at this point, we really haven't discussed that. Like I said, the bigger impetus at this point was looking at how do we connect Hampton Roads with all these roadway improvements that are planned. You know, you can look at some of these corridors that we have here, and you can go one by one and talk about some of the various improvements, whether it's the new tunnels being bored at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, or you know, the 29-mile gap on I-64. Obviously, Route 460. You know, that's a whole different ballgame when you talk about Route 460. And then, you know, I-87 to accessing North Carolina. So that was the impetus for this study. We haven't really discussed broadening it more to access to the ports in terms of whether it's barge with marine highways or rail. But you know, if that's the will of this group, obviously we can discuss that and look at including that in the study.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the comment that Bob made with respect to the Hampton Roads being the cul-de-sac. But frankly, you know, when you think much broader, you all have assets in the region that no other region in the state of Virginia has. And I think perhaps you should think about perhaps thinking highlighting that and you know, having that discussion about, you know, how markets can be tapped outside of the United States and the role that the Hampton Roads region can play in developing those markets.
Ivan, if I can jump in, Mr. Chair, if I can jump in, I just wanted to chime in. So Ivan, I think one of the things as Keith mentioned, we started thinking about the roadway, but if you notice under our work elements, we do say look at other measures. So that was we just threw safety and economic development, which kind of lines up with what you're talking about. We are cognizant of the data limitations sometimes, but it's a very good point. And I think we'll keep that in the back of our mind as we work through. As we said, we're still just getting started. That's why we wanted to have the conversation, because the more we hear from you, the better the study is going to be. So just wanted to add that in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Professor. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so you make a good point. You know, we have other modes of transportation in and out of the region, and considering rail and our marine highways, you know, we just consider those appropriately as part of this study. I have a question to myself before I ask mine, see if anybody else has any additional questions. So, you know, I think similar studies have been done. The information is a little bit old on those. It's appropriate to update that information, but how will this differ from, you know, what we've learned through previous studies?
Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm unmuted. The big difference in this study is looking at it more on a regional scale. Many of these corridors have had individual studies done. Obviously, I-64 has had many studies done for the whole corridor from Richmond through to the peninsula. I-87, North Carolina did a study looking at that. But these were all done for individual corridors, and to an extent, it was looking at alternatives for each individual corridor. It really wasn't looking at the more, I don't want to use the word global scale, but we'll say that the regional impact to Hampton Roads, you know, weighing I-87 improvements versus Route 58, you know, what would be the benefits and costs of each of those relative to one another? To my knowledge, nothing like that has been done, and that was kind of what we're envisioning for this study, is kind of comparing all these different alternatives where these studies have been done and looking at it, what would its impacts to Hampton Roads be for each of these versus the cost, and what might make the most sense in terms of improving the access to Hampton Roads.
The other question I have is, you know, obviously we want these the results of these studies to be as effective as they can be in terms of obtaining funds for projects. And so are we covering all the bases in terms of the questions we're answering about how projects will score in all of the criteria regions that projects will be evaluated against for funding? Like resiliency has not been a criteria for funding, I think, until as of late, but is more, is starting to become more and more important of the criteria for funding. So, are we just making sure that what the results are will answer the questions that match up with scoring for projects?
Yeah, I'll speak to this, and then I'm not sure if Bob is still on the line, but I'll let him fill in the gaps that I miss here. But yeah, we definitely, I mean, that is the point of the study, is not only figuring out which ones would be the best for access in and out of Hampton Roads, but which is the best to get funding, whether it's on a federal level, whether it's smart scale, any of those. I mean, that is the point, is improving access to Hampton Roads, and that includes, obviously funding and following through on construction for this. So I would agree, David. We definitely want to include that and look at some of the, definitely include the criteria that we know of. We know what the criteria that are included in the smart scale process as of this point. We know for like federal grants what those are to a certain extent. Obviously, that's a moving target, through the years to a certain extent. But we'll definitely look at that and some of those criteria and see how these individual roads meet those criteria. I don't know if Bob wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I think you did a good job at that, Keith. David, what a great point. So let's be honest, right? As our coastal storms intensify, hurricane evacuation, not even hurricane evacuation, storm evacuation becomes more and more critical. And we know that some of these roads here, we have the data and we know they flood, right? And we lose lanes of traffic or partial lanes, and that has an impact. So I think being able to integrate some of the work we've done on sea level rise scenarios and how that interfaces with our transportation network is something that we can do here. I think taking a close look at, how these corridors function or need to function related to evacuation is critically important too. And even if we don't have a hurricane or a coastal storm, if they flood, they impact our ability to move freight as well. So I think all of that needs to go into this. The other thing, David, that I just wanted to raise, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but, and Ivan, what great comments you were making. One of the things we're worried about is we've got to support our port. We've got to support our maritime industry. We've got to support our freight movement with our landside transportation system and network. And we've got to proactively stay ahead of that so that we can do that. And David, I know, one of the things we've talked about a lot in our infrastructure meetings is just the number of at-grade rail crossings and the difficulty that presents for our freight movement, the impact in our communities. So that's going to be something that I think we're going to need to get into with this study as well. As we think about gateways, they're this corridor, but there are also other things like rail corridors as well, and how we can move our freight and product to the port and from the port. So I think there's a lot of things, David, we could take a look at as we try to holistically take a look at this. And I think Keith nailed it. We're hoping to be able to do some type of a regional comparison in terms of where the best investment might be. I think Pavitra had something else to add, David.
No, I just wanted to add, Bob, that while each of these corridors, we can look at it from a regional level, but they serve different purposes in different parts of the region. So, and that's something in our conversations, we've been more cognizant of that. So for example, Route 58, we can look at it as connecting to Raleigh, but the Route 58 serves a different purpose within our localities. And so trying to find a balance between keeping it regional, but also being able to evaluate across corridors. But keeping in mind, all of this is helpful only if it leads to us getting funding. And the fact that we are positioned well with our regional priorities, again, hopefully that gives us a framework to get going in the right direction. But I think these are really very valid comments that you guys are giving us today. But I think some, yeah, I'm gonna stop there.
This is Karen. I just add one other comment again. I know everybody's had great ideas and not to create more to your work plan, but to build on some of the great work that you guys have done. Can we just put the overlay of the large industrial land uses as part of this? Because as we look at today, it's all the through traffic, but as we look to the future, you know, we want to make sure that while there may not be traffic today, this may be the prime spot in the future. So again, I don't want to keep piling on, but as we look to the future, those studies that you guys have already done, hopefully we can just kind of overlay that on and say, hey, this is the future vision of those key land uses that we already have. I think will be great.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that, Karen. We'll definitely incorporate that work that we've shared with each other and include that in the study.
Very, very good point. We want to plan for the future, not the past. Anybody else on this subject? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. So that takes us to the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan, and Dale, you're up.
Hello, and thank you. Bye.
Maybe quickly, did I see that Tom Cross joined this? Barb, do you want to introduce Tom?
Sure, it would be great if Dale, if I can pause your presentation for a few seconds. You don't have to change the screen. Oh, so we do have Thomas Cross was able to join us today, and Thomas is our new Director of State and Local Government Affairs. We're really excited that Thomas joined the port on April 19th. He comes to us with experience in both the Senate committee, as a Senate committee clerk, as well as working as a legislative aide for Senator Martin on the peninsula. So Thomas, if I don't know if you want to unmute and just say hello, but I know there will be many opportunities, again, as David said early, as we get closer and closer to coming out of our COVID quarantines to meet in person, and we look forward to Thomas being a real partner in all of the efforts across the region as well as at the state level.
Thank you so much, Barb. I'm obviously very new to this, but excited to learn and come from the world of General Assembly for the past 5.5 years with Monty Mason. And as he would typically refer to, you all are all the experts. So I'm trying to be as attentive as possible. But again, just excited to contribute and excited to meet everybody, one virtually, but also in person here soon. So thank you for the time.
Thomas, welcome to the team. Look forward to continuing to work with you. All right, thanks for that. Dale, please continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, so today I'll be providing an update on the 2045 Long Range Transportation Plan. So hopefully everyone can see my slides.
Yes, yes.
All right. So I wanted to start off just an overview of the previous briefings that we've provided to FTAC over the past 5 years. So we started updating our Long Range Transportation Plan to the horizon year of 2045. Again, about 5 years ago, we've presented the socioeconomic forecast to FTAC. We've also worked with the port and FTAC on identifying truck or freight zones, which is critical in our travel demand model, which produces forecasts, traffic forecasts, scenario planning, visioning for the LRTP, the prioritization enhancements that we did over the past few years to improve our prioritization process, evaluating candidate projects. FTAC also submitted a number of candidate projects for us to consider for inclusion in the Long Range Transportation Plan, and then also briefing FTAC on the prioritization scores. And the feedback that we've received from this committee has been very critical and getting us to the point that was discussed earlier in the meeting of having regional support for transportation priorities. The most recent briefing that we've provided was back in February, where staff presented the draft 2045 long-range transportation plan, fiscally constrained list of projects in which FTAC approved a resolution of support. So with FTAC's resolution of support, we also had a resolution of support from our Community Advisory Committee, and then a recommendation from our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee. This information was presented to our HRTPO board at a special meeting on March 29th. The HRTPO board, as Executive Director Crum mentioned earlier, approved our fiscally constrained list of projects. Again, these are our transportation priorities that we have identified over the next 20 years for Hampton Roads. In addition, the board also approved associated reports that document the funding assumptions behind our fiscal constraint, and also a project information guide that is a one-page summary for each of the projects that are included in the 2045 long-range transportation plan. So it's about 13.5 billion projects that have been identified for fiscal constraint up to the year 2045. And the board also approved our regionally significant projects for regional conformity assessment, which I'll discuss a little bit later in this presentation. So just some highlights, and as Bob was mentioning earlier, our prioritization process, to remind some of our current members and even our new members, our prioritization process has about 70 different measures in which we evaluate candidate projects. And we look at things like safety, congestion, reliability. We're looking at economic vitality. How does it improve freight? How does it improve access to the military? Social equity. So all these things that the federal infrastructure package is looking for these multiple outcomes, we thoroughly evaluate our candidate projects. So the projects that end up in the plan are the most robust projects for the region. So we have about 17 billion that we've set aside for maintenance and system preservation, and that leaves us, when we look at our revenue forecast, about almost 14 billion for additional capacity. And this slide shows how that's segmented. In our 2045 LRTP, we have about almost 12 billion identified for improvements to roads, bridges, and tunnels, almost $1 billion in transit improvements, 160 million for active transportation, and then for specific intermodal projects, we have 326 million. And this slide just further breaks down how that package of projects is for our plan. We have 139 projects. This would be for construction projects and some studies. And our long-range transportation plan has to be multimodal. So we have various types of roadway projects, interstate, non-interstate. We have intermodal freight projects, and then we have some transit and active transportation projects as well. Since I presented to you back in February, we did have some changes to the list that I presented, so I wanted to show those. I think I just lost my PowerPoint.
You need me to put it on the screen, Dale?
Let's see if I can pull it back up real quick. Apologies. So hopefully everyone can see the table. Sorry about that. But we did have some changes to the draft list since February. This would include, we added a couple of studies on 64, the North King Street interchange and LaSalle Avenue interchange. These will be studies for the city of Hampton, and then also in the city of Hampton, Coliseum Drive Extension B. And then we also had a request to include the preliminary engineering for the second Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel, what they call the Chesapeake Tunnel. They're progressing with that work, doing preliminary engineering right away, and soon we'll be moving to construction on that second tunnel as well. We also had a couple of projects we removed from the draft list. It's the 22nd Street Bridge in Chesapeake, and that's because the project is complete and open. And then we also removed an active transportation project in the city of Portsmouth based on city request.
Hey, and Dale,
Sure.
maybe for the benefit of the group and the new members, going back to the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, I think it's the case that all those projects are funded by the tolls, they're basically funded by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, but they still need to be in the region's plan, correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So we have the Thimble Shoals Tunnel in the plan for construction, and then this additional preliminary engineering. It is covered mostly by the authority's toll revenue account. I think they also have some TIFIA loans, but it's money outside of our traditional LRTP revenues. And because they are regionally significant, you were correct that we do have to reflect it in our long-range transportation plan. So I also presented these projects, freight-related projects that are included in the 2045 long-range transportation plan. So just wanted to showcase that we have several projects that are on freight corridors. I've added the additional projects, the 2 studies on 64 North King Street and LaSalle Avenue, added them to this list in that Chesapeake Tunnel preliminary engineering. And then we have the 5 intermodal freight projects as well that are included in our long-range transportation plan. So in terms of conformity, and this is where we currently are at, so transportation conformity is the link between air quality improvement and transportation planning. So a regional conformity assessment, Hampton Roads, it's really getting into the weeds, but we are deemed a maintenance area, so that we do have to do conformity. We don't really have to do emissions modeling, but we do have to assess that our projects aren't going to make air quality worse. So the region does a regional conformity assessment, both on the long-range transportation plan and on our 4-year transportation improvement program. So we have conducted this regional conformity assessment, and this was submitted to Federal Highway in early April. It's usually about like a 60-day process for federal partners to review. So we're hoping to get a finding of conformity before our due date of this summer. And this is just our timeline. Again, our due date is July. We're trying to see if we can get our 2045 adopted by June, but July at the latest. We are not accepting any amendments to our long-range transportation plan or TIP until we can get that finding of conformity and then get the 2045 long-range transportation plan adopted by the board. And then these are just the resources of reports that we've produced to date, and it documents some of the stuff that I've mentioned in this presentation, the socioeconomic forecast, our prioritization process, how candidate projects scored, again, our funding plan, and then the 1-page summaries in our project information guide. And then we also have an online map if anyone's interested in zooming in on any of the projects that are included in the plan. And then we're just wrapping up our documentation. We're working on plan performance, which I'll be presenting that to at the next FTAC meeting. And then also pulling together a vision plan of all the unfunded transportation projects for our region. This is so that as funding does become available to the region, we have a prioritized list that we can draw from. And then also documenting public involvement efforts over the last 5 years, and then working on a rural long-range transportation plan. So again, we're just waiting on our federal partners to review our regional conformity assessment, and then looking for the board to officially adopt the 2045 long-range transportation plan in June or July of this year. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions from anyone.
Thank you, Dale. Open it up for questions. Okay, hearing none. Thank you for that. And next on the agenda, critical urban freight corridors. Keith.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Let me get the screen pulled up here. Great. So the FAST Act, which is the federal surface transportation legislation package that is currently that we are currently under, it established a national highway freight program, which also created a national highway freight network. So this national highway freight program has a certain amount of funding that can be allocated to to certain projects that are very beneficial to the movement of freight, as long as it is on this National Highway Freight Network. So if you look at the National Highway Freight Network, it's composed of four different types of roadways, and that's the primary highway freight system, the other interstates that are not on the PHFS, critical rural freight corridors, and then most of what I'm going to be talking with you today about, which are these critical urban freight corridors. So what this first map shows you is in the Commonwealth of Virginia, those roadways that are included in the primary highway freight system. Now, these were established by the federal legislation, so it really wasn't, a choice by Hampton Roads to include these roadways on the list, for example. There's a set amount of mileage that was established by the FAST Act, and so these are the interstates in our region that are or in the state that are part of the primary highway freight system. I do want to point out, you may notice that there are interstates in our state in Virginia that didn't actually make that list. And most notably, if you look at our region, if you look at I-64, for example, it is only on the list up to Battlefield Boulevard. So the part through the high-rise bridge in Bowers Hill is not part of the primary highway freight system. Neither is I-664 or 464 or 264. So it's a very limited network for those roadways that are part of the primary highway freight system. I do want to point out that these are the roadways that are eligible to receive these National Highway Freight Program allocations. The remainder of the interstate system, as it is here, is not eligible to receive those allocations. However, for those roadways that are part of the critical rural freight corridors or critical urban freight corridors, those are also eligible to receive these National Highway Freight Program allocations. So the reason I brought this to this group today is that for large MPOs such as Hampton Roads that have greater than 500,000 people, we are responsible for designating those critical urban freight corridors in our area in coordination with the state. So the state is able to designate all those critical rural freight corridors and also the critical urban freight corridors that are in the smaller MPOs with less than 500,000 people. So unfortunately, I showed you how limited the primary highway freight system was. It's even more limited when you start talking about critical rural and critical urban freight corridors. The whole state of Virginia is only allowed to designate 167 miles throughout the whole state for those critical rural freight corridors, and it's half of that much when you talk about critical urban freight corridors. So throughout the whole state, only 83 additional miles can be designated as CUFCs. So before I get to looking at Hampton Roads and those roadways we can designate as CUFCs, I want to point out, and you can see I highlighted it, put it in bold, everything I could possibly do to make this stand out. In the state of Virginia, if you are designated as a critical rural freight corridor or a critical urban freight corridor, it does not make any difference on the likelihood of a project being selected for improvement, and it does not change the amount of funding available for that project. The way Virginia allocates money is almost entirely through the smart scale process. There are some other smaller processes, but primarily smart scale is how projects are selected and funding is allocated to those projects. The purpose of this, however, is to provide flexibility to the state for this NHFP funding that they allocate through smart scale. So just to take an example, if you look at the 2020 smart scale process, they select all the projects throughout the state that they choose to fund based on the prioritization criteria. Once they have that list, they determine, hey, these 10 projects would be eligible to use NHFP funding on, and so they tie that funding to those projects that were selected through smart scale. So just want to highlight as we move here and talk about which roadways to include in the CUFC, keep in mind it has no impact on whether any projects on that particular roadway could be selected through smart scale. So, yeah, Dave.
Just for my very simple mind, is it fair to say that though that designation as a rural freight corridor, urban freight corridor, does open those corridors up to other funds that they might not be able to receive, therefore perhaps making those projects more likely to receive the necessary funding?
The answer is officially no, unofficially possibly. If you look at some of these federal grants, for example, there is no check mark box where you can say, hey, it's a critical urban freight corridor. However, you can submit as part of your grant. It is part of a critical urban freight corridor, and then the people giving out the grants might look more favorably on that. So yeah, officially no, but unofficially, yes, it probably does help, David. One other thing I want to add, and I was going to mention this later in the presentation, is since this was established by the FAST Act, as of right now, the FAST Act is set to expire September 30th of this year. So the next federal legislation package could change that. You know, it may eliminate this program. It may add more mileage that we can add to the process. It may make it where it does make it more likely to get certain federal grant programs or whatever. So we really don't know once FAST Act expires where this will go. But yes, it's entirely possible in the follow-up to the FAST Act, maybe that would be a benefit to be part of a critical urban or rural freight corridor.
All right, thanks. Good.
Yeah, no problem. So we've been working with the Virginia Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment to look at allocating this critical urban freight corridor mileage. OIPI is the office that is assigning the critical rural freight network and also the CUFCs for those smaller metropolitan areas. So we've been working with them in terms of looking at our region and those roadways that would make the most sense to designate as critical urban freight corridors. So OIPI went and they actually put together a draft network for the whole state that I'll show you here in a little bit. And as part of that, their primary goal was to provide a contiguous designation along the interstates throughout the state. Because as I showed you, portions of I-64 and other interstates in the state are not included in that primary highway freight system. So their first goal was to look at those and include those so that you could use the National Highway Freight Program funding for it. And then also look at other corridors of statewide significance that are not included in the PHFS. So based on this, we in Hampton Roads have been allocated a total of 24 miles out of that 83 statewide that we can designate critical urban freight corridors in our region. So, you do the math, that's roughly, I guess, almost 30% of the mileage in the state. So in terms of that, our region probably got a pretty high number compared to other areas, but it's still only 24 miles that we can do in our region. So what this number represents is it's equal to those lengths of I-64 and I-64 that I showed you earlier that are not currently part of the PHFS. So this is the map that OIPI put together and what they're recommending in terms of adding across the state. So if you see the gold lines, those are the current primary highway freight system throughout the state. And so they're looking at primarily adding the rest of I-64, whether it's a critical rural freight corridor or in areas like Charlottesville or Stanton and those areas where it would be critical urban freight corridors. And then when you pop down to our region, the 24 miles would be the remainder of 64 across the high-rise bridge to Bowers Hill, and then 664 through Chesapeake and Suffolk across the Monitor Merrimack to where the primary highway freight system ends roughly around Terminal Avenue up there. So based on their recommendation, we at the TPO are also making the same recommendation to allocate our 24 miles that we are allowed to as a region to those two roadways. So what we wanted to ask for today, before opening this up for questions and feedback, is we're going to ask for you to recommend TPO board approval for these critical urban freight corridors to include the remainder of 664 between Bowers Hill and Terminal Avenue, and then the remainder of 64 between Battlefield Boulevard and Bowers Hill. So with that, I'll open it up to questions, and then once we're done with questions, I'm going to ask for a motion for including these roadways for critical urban freight corridors in our region.
Hey, Dave, this is Barb. I have a few comments and maybe a question to ask. Okay. So, Keith, I appreciate that in your presentation you described the current impact versus the potential future impact of these corridor designations, because we in Virginia are, fortunately, we're in a new emerging space and place with the establishment of a statewide freight advisory committee who can potentially have a voice in how these national highway freight program funds are allocated to freight priorities across the Commonwealth's network rather than being absorbed into the funding streams associated with smart scale projects. And I think it's important that, we recognize that smart scale has its opportunities and constraints, but the importance of Virginia positioning itself, the Hampton Roads region positioning itself to align with federal programs and policies. Again, you described this in your presentation, and I appreciate that, because I think being able to include that nuanced detail of, yes, this project is on a critical urban freight corridor while we're competing for federal program funds is absolutely leverage that will it will influence potentially an outcome. And so I'd like to suggest and perhaps ask that I recognize and understand and support why the 64 and 664 recommendations would have come from through the OIP processes to the TPO, but I think there's value in adding the 164 corridor. It does serve both big today as well as the future Craney Island Marine Terminal, and providing that identification of that corridor as a critical urban freight corridor, I think is clearly a position that the port supports, and we would hope that the freight community would support as well.
Thanks, Barb. I do want to mention, now that you bring that up, we have been in contact concerning the Western Freeway Corridor, because I brought this up with OIPI and the importance of Western Freeway. It's the Port of Virginia's largest container port is on that roadway, and it seems really strange to have the largest container port in the state of Virginia not being on your statewide freight network. So I have been in contact. I have not received an official response from OIPI in terms of what their thoughts are on it. There is a little bit of leftover mileage that they did not allocate to the MPOs throughout the state. I'm not sure if it'd be enough to cover that or not, but OIPI does know that we have raised this concern about the Western Freeway. And so moving forward, I don't know, short of more mileage being allocated to our region, how easily we can handle that. But we, based on the action today, we could definitely take the action to approve 64 and 664 example, with the caveat that as additional mileage comes forward or something like that, that we would like to add the Western Freeway between 664 and the port as a critical urban freight corridor, if that makes sense. But yeah, we've definitely brought this to the attention of OIPI and the importance of 164 to freight movement in our region.
Thank you. And so to our FTAC members, as you consider the resolution and what action you may want to take from the perspective of the port, we would encourage you to consider language similar to what Keith has just described. And I just put it out there for your thoughts, your input, and consideration. Thank you.
Questions, comments from others?
I got a question. Could you zoom out on the map a little bit again?
This one?
Yep. According to this, freight travels north before it goes west or south. So there's a substantial omission here, and I realized it makes perfect sense to adopt what is available with the 24 miles here. But it's amazing to me that there's no recognition that Route 58 is a critical freight corridor for the entire western part of Virginia and the western part of North Carolina. Is that because their focus is different, or is it just an omission?
In terms of the state, their first goal, as I mentioned, was to get the rest of the interstate system, particularly I-64, as part of the network. So that included the critical rural freight corridors you see in purple, and then the green in Charlottesville and the Stanton areas. Once they did that, they used a prioritization process of some sort. I'm not exactly sure what. Looking at other corridors of statewide significance. Now, there are 12 of those throughout the state. Route 58 is one of the corridors of statewide significance. And they looked at, in terms of number of trucks, amount of freight moved, things like that, truck bottlenecks, I believe, to determine where they wanted to put the rest of their rural mileage. So, for example, you can see, I believe this is US 29 near the Washington, D.C. area. The road connecting Front Royal to the inland port, I believe, that you see here. Portions of US 13 on the eastern shore, and then I believe this is also US 29 north of the Danville area. The state did use a prioritization process for those corridors of statewide significance, and US 58 would have been part of it. So what reason it was not prioritized, say, in this rural area, say, east of Emporia, versus US 29 or US 13 on the eastern shore, I'm not sure, other than they did have a prioritization process to score that.
Certainly in terms of intermodal and international commerce, 58 would be a significant, I think, corridor for freight to move across.
Definitely. And that is our second largest gateway in terms of freight movement to the region. So it's definitely critical to Hampton Roads in terms of moving freight in and out.
And it also, as I usually have to point out when I talk with legislators, or to remind them that they've invested so heavily in the western part of the state that it's critical to be able to get freight in and out of there so that the businesses that have taken root can prosper. So, okay, that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
Might it be the case that 58 is not included just because of how much, what portion of 58 would you include? Because there's just so much mileage that you would have to include.
Right. Even if you look at just from Bowers Hill to I-95 and Emporia, I mean, you're talking, what is that, 80 miles, something like that, of which about half is in our MPO and half isn't. So, the half in our MPO would be an urban corridor. When you're talking 83 miles statewide and you're looking to take 40 of it roughly for US 58, but the math just doesn't work. So that may have influenced their decision as well. Not just their prioritization, but also the fact that so many miles would have to be allocated to 58 just to connect I-95 to the Hampton Roads region. I can definitely ask, OIPI and see what their reasoning was other than the prioritization. But yeah, I would guess that's a big part of this also, David, is just the high amount of mileage it would take to incorporate.
I'd be interested for comments from the members with regards to the value of including all of the 664 versus perhaps suggesting that the Western Freeway be included in lieu of some portion of 664. Any thoughts?
Did you mention that there may be some additional mileage available for allocation from other parts? And how many, the Western Freeway, is that 4 or 5 or 6 miles? How many miles are we talking about?
For the Western Freeway, it would be just over 4 miles. I think it's 4.1 if you go from VIG Boulevard to 664. The state does have a small amount left over. I'm not even sure if it's that much. And some of that is also based on what the other metropolitan areas do. If Richmond allocates all their miles in the Washington, D.C. area, which is the other large MPO, if they allocate all of their miles, I would go with the assumption that yes, they will. But that the leftover will be impacted by those actions. But I think the state did have just a little bit of leftover, just for in case they wanted to add more roadways. Also keeping in mind they allocate them to the smaller urban areas, so it wouldn't just be Hampton Roads, Richmond, and DC looking to get those additional miles. It's also OIPI assigning them to the Roanoke's and Lynchburg's of the world, I guess, as well.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Diane Grigsby. You said that this act was up for in September would end, that there's a potential to revise it or eliminate the act. Has anyone mentioned to any of the larger businesses and organizations if they want them to expand it that will help growth of their companies?
And I'm not sure on that. All I know is, we have no idea what the FAST Act, the future of the FAST Act will look like at this point. Obviously with the federal infrastructure package, that's kind of the big deal at the moment in Washington. And so the FAST Act extension, whatever replaces the FAST Act may be attached to that, may not be attached to that. So there really hasn't been much discussion that I know of in DC in terms of what the freight aspects of the future FAST Act will be. And to add on to that, I guess, once again, what will happen to this particular program, whether it could, when these new programs come out every, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on the extensions, a lot of times they change quite a bit. The FAST Act was quite different than MAP 21, which was the program before it. It created this National Highway Freight Program. So there's no saying whether the new extension will build on it, remove it, tie it into a different program. It's just so tough to say with these federal packages that it's really tough to answer that.
Okay. Any other anything else before I entertain a motion? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to can you roll your screen back, Keith?
Yeah, you're gonna have to give me just a second. I was pulling up the voter roll there.
Okay. I would entertain let me find it. I would entertain a motion that the FTAC recommends board approval to designate I-64 between Battlefield Boulevard and I-664 Bowers Hill, and I-664 between I-64 Bowers Hill and Trimble Avenue as part of the HRTPO's critical urban freight corridor, and that the state be requested that OIPI be requested that any additional miles left in the statewide system be allocated to the Western Freeway with future prioritization for the 58 corridor.
So moved.
Second.
What is that?
Discussion. Hearing no discussion, I'll call for votes.
Okay. Mike Abbott,
Aye.
Diane Grigsby,
Aye.
I'm sorry. Okay. David White,
Aye.
Bob Eagley,
Yes.
and Cannon Moss.
Aye.
Great, thank you. So we will move ahead with this recommendation to our Transportation Technical Advisory Committee tomorrow, and definitely state your concerns regarding the Western Freeway and Route 58. And then we'll also bring that to the board here at their May meeting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Keith. So that, let's see. Now to the part that we've all been most looking forward to, FTAC bylaws.
Now we're to the easy part of the meeting, the FTAC bylaws. Hopefully this shouldn't take very long. We've been going over this here this is our fourth meeting now, I believe. So I just want to quickly go over the changes we made based on the comments that we received at the February meeting, and then hopefully take an action at this to recommend that the TPO board approve these updated bylaws. So hopefully you can see my screen with the bylaws up there. I think we made 4 changes based on the last meeting in terms of the bylaw. The first one here is under 3.2. Based on a comment, we originally called it technical advice and support. We removed the word technical, so now it just says the FTAC shall provide advice and support. The second comment we had was based on David's comment down here at the bottom, where it says, talking about officials and making sure their terms are extended for the amount of time that they're an official. So we added this sentence here: the term of a member serving as an official may be extended as long as they remain an officer. And I believe, David, that was your exact recommendation to incorporate in there. So we put that in there. The third thing, we wanted to clarify the port's role in the committee. So we clarified this bullet by saying that staff from the Virginia Port Authority will work in partnership with the HRTPO to advise and support the administration of the committee. And the last change that we made, I think I went by it actually. We added this bullet here. This was in concern to the discussion on electronic meetings and things like that that we had at the last meeting. And obviously, things have changed a lot here with COVID and how we handle our meetings. So we updated the bylaws here to say that meetings during which FTAC business is discussed shall only be conducted through means permitted by the HRTPO board bylaws and the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So in cases like this, obviously that allows for electronic meetings, and then moving forward, once the state of emergency is lifted, basically it'll go back to what the HRTPO board bylaws allow for meeting procedures. So it's just kind of clarifying that a little bit to say that whatever the HRTPO board can do in terms of meetings, the FTAC is allowed to do as well. So those were the 4 changes that I made. Otherwise, the bylaws should be the same as they were at the last meeting. And so unless there are any additional comments or questions, our hope is that you will recommend approval here this afternoon for the updated set of bylaws. Sorry.
Thank you, Keith, for that review of the changes from the last meeting. Would anybody care to go through all of the changes again?
If you would like to, they're in your minutes. They're in your agenda packet.
So, obviously we've gone through these thoroughly, thanks to Keith and everybody else involved in making these recommended changes. Any questions or comments regarding those suggested changes to the bylaws? Do I hear a motion to accept all of the changes to the bylaws as have been presented?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. We'll call for the vote.
Mike Abbott,
Aye.
Diane Grigsby,
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the mute. Yeah.
thank you. David White,
Aye.
Bob Eagley,
Yes.
and Cannon Moss.
Aye.
Great, thank you. The motion passes. So what will happen is they will go onto the agenda for the TPO board here at their May meeting. And then once the board approves the updated minutes, they will become the official bylaws of the FTAC.
All right, good. Thank you again for all of the work on that. It's never fun, never easy.
No problem, thank you.
Let's do it again next year.
I think once every 12 years, I think it's just about the right amount of time, just about right.
FTAC officers.
Okay, so this is really quick. So based on the bylaws that you just approved, we will be changing from co-chairs to a chair and vice chair to match most of our other committees. So when we meet again here, roughly July, August timeframe, hopefully, at the start of the meeting, we will have to appoint a chair and vice chair moving forward for the committee. So at this point, I just wanted to give a heads up to that. Expect to hear from, I'm sure, Barb and me and others here in the next few months in terms of volunteering for those roles. And like I said, at the start of the next meeting, we will take a vote and appoint a chair and vice chair.
Well, I see Rick and Larry are missing, so.
Okay. Feel free to make a motion if you'd like. Not sure how well that would go. But
So everybody has received fair warning. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Future meeting topics and agenda action items or action items.
Okay, so for our next meeting, which I mentioned, we're looking at probably late summertime, so hopefully somewhere around July and August if we can find a time when not everybody's on vacation. These are some of the possible topics we'll look at. I know 3 of these will definitely be on the next meeting agenda. The first one is the 2045 LRTP. As Dale mentioned today, we should have an approved plan by that point, so she can describe that, and then also go over some of the plan performance metrics that will be included in the final LRTP. Also, for B, we have the V-Trans freight element. As part of the V-Trans multimodal statewide long-range plan, they're required to include a section on it related to freight, a freight study, if you will, for the entire state. So OIPI wanted to discuss this with the FTAC at their next meeting, so that'll be on there. And finally, letter D on there, the Bowers Hill interchange study. There's currently, I shouldn't say currently, there's a study about to begin looking at the Bowers Hill interchange and I-664 between that interchange up to College Drive and possible improvements to look at. So VDOT wants to bring that to this FTAC here at the next meeting to discuss some of the alternatives that they will be looking at as part of that study. So those 3 things will definitely be on the next agenda. I have a few other items here that we would like to share with this group as we have time here moving forward. One quick question I wanted to ask before opening it up for other items. For under J, I wrote down, based on the last meeting, there was a conversation about safety around trucks. I'm not sure who brought that up, but could you give a little more detail as to what you were looking for so that we can bring that to this group?
I think that might have been me.
Okay.
I was referencing the law in Georgia, and the signage that Georgia has put up, making it very clear to passenger vehicles that they need to give them plenty of room before pulling in front of them or face enforcement action from the police. Signage would be a good start, but also an education program would be very helpful, give trucks room. Most of the accidents that we see involve cars changing lanes rapidly behind trucks while they're making signaled lane changes at high rates of speed, and doing other foolish things to cut in front of trucks to make exit ramps. That's where the greatest risk exists today. That was what I was referring to on that one.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Like I said, I just wrote that down and I didn't know what that was in reference to. So
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, we can definitely look at that and look to bring that to this group here at a future meeting. Are there any other topics that any members would be interested in bringing to this group here at a future meeting?
I have a couple. I didn't know where to put it in the course of all the presentations today, so maybe it's best to put it here. But in the course of the planning, where would talking about building truck parking facilities, overnight park facilities, and rest areas be? There's a nationwide problem with inadequate places for trucks to stop and safely do their mandatory 30-minute break, or to overnight when they run out of hours using ELDs. In connection with that, we want to look forward in a green initiative connected to that would be to build in high-speed charging stations for the coming Class 8 electric trucks.
Keith, I can volunteer to reach out to Kathy McGee on both of those because I know that she's been leading, along with Eric Johnson at VDOT, a planning effort on statewide truck parking, as well as Kathy and BJ working together on the topic of and perhaps the synergy that can exist between where the truck parking is located and the opportunity for the co-location of charging facilities. That I can reach out on those and coordinate with you for a future agenda item.
Great, thanks, Barb. Do you know where they're at with that statewide truck parking study? I know it began, and I was a little bit involved at the very beginning, but I don't know the status of where it's at this particular moment.
I would need to follow up to be absolutely sure. I know they have had the meetings have continued and they're continuing to move forward, but I'm not sure if it's concluded yet. But I can check with Kathy. I have a call scheduled for this Friday and kind of check in and then follow up with you.
Great, thanks, Barb.
Anything else in terms of future topics or any, even if there's a indication that one or more of these hold more interest for anybody than others?
And I do want to mention quickly here, now that I look at it, when we look at letter H, legislative agendas, the FTAC a couple of years ago asked to be involved earlier in the process when HRTPO and HRPDC put together a legislative agenda every year. I want to say it's around the fall. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Pavitra, if you know. But I think we put together our legislative agenda sometime in the fall to have it ready to go for the General Assembly for when they convene in January. And there was the FTAC wanted to be involved earlier in the process with HRTPO in terms of possibly including freight aspects in the legislative agenda. So that's another thing that around the end of summertime, if that's the right time, we would bring that in front of this group to discuss the possible regional legislative agenda.
Keith, I'm not sure the exact timing, but I think fall sounds about right, but I can definitely confirm and make sure I think it's fall, but let me get back to you on that for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that's an important point, Keith. So, you know, at least sitting from this seat today, I think that the group would find, would very much appreciate the opportunity to have some input prior to the, I think there is a legislative committee or whatever, that's the legislative agenda.
Sure, well, I'll definitely make sure to include that on our summer meeting then.
And then I guess in item 10 for today's meeting, or sorry, the minutes from the last meeting, there was an item about permitting trucks in the hot and express lanes, which is going to be carried over to future meetings.
Yes, that's still in the future meetings. And actually, when VDOT discusses Bowers Hill interchange, my guess is that may come up during that conversation as well. So be ready for that, I would say. But yes, we will bring that up definitely at a future meeting as well.
All right, thank you. It occurs to me that actually at the very beginning, I skipped right over the submitted public comments. I'm going to presume that we don't have any.
No, we did not receive any.
And just I'll offer a quick invitation if anybody wishes to offer a public comment. Okay, hearing none. Old new business. Barb, do you perhaps want to comment on you made reference to the Freight Advisory Committee, the Virginia Act. Do you want to comment on that at all?
Well, sure. And we will have more to report at the next FTAC meeting, but the statewide FAC convened its first meeting in late March, and it was organized, the welcoming provided by Secretary Valentine. It's been an important priority of the administration and of the Secretary to ensure that the voice of freight is involved in the transportation processes, as it is so critical in creating and ensuring economic opportunity, not only across Virginia, but across the nation. And our next meeting has not been set, but it is scheduled for the June timeframe. We can follow up with you all to when that meeting will be, just for your awareness. But we anticipate after the June meeting, 2 additional meetings that will be held throughout the calendar year 2021. And one will include an inaugural freight forum with the goal of engaging with our freight partners, not only in the region in Virginia, but casting a wider, larger net. More information on that about the when. Probably we can give you an update at our summer meeting, lots more detail by then. But the interest is sincere and real in ensuring that the voice of freight is considered in the transportation planning process. The Secretary, even at our March meeting, we were talking about at the Statewide Freight Advisory Committee that there would be a briefing on V-Trans, and that maybe the plan, the freight plan for V-Trans was advancing on a schedule that may allow an eclipsed opportunity for input by the freight community, to which the Secretary responded, "Oh no, I think we can change the schedule to make sure freight, our freight partners have had ample time to provide an input on the direction of where this freight element for Virginia needs to be going." So I think it's very exciting to be moving from space to place where freight was considered generally considered at the statewide level to statewide planning process of V-Trans once every 4 years when the plan was developed, and now it's the statewide advisory committee will have a continuous voice and representation, and it will allow the industry and the Commonwealth to have a body that can provide input should a major event like a pandemic or any type of event occur. There is a standing body that is convened and able to provide input to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, to the Secretary of Transportation, and the administration on a voice for people. Very exciting. More to come. We'll make sure we keep you updated.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. It's very encouraging, and thank you for the work that you and others have done to get us to this point. And you know, it's important from my perspective that we have an overlap in terms of representation on the State Freight Advisory Committee and the FTAC here to help make sure that there's alignment between what's happening here, the FTAC, and that can be carried through to statewide freight transportation planning. So again, all very positive. Thank you. One other thing I thought I would mention before we move to adjournment is, or discuss the next meeting, is coming back to the conversation earlier about membership. Keith pointed out that we are now at 7 per the bylaws that we're pushing, that we're advancing for approval. The committee is to have a membership of less than 9. So I would invite all of the committee members to be thinking about others that you would like to recommend for membership to the FTAC, so that we can have a fuller representation of the freight interest on the FTAC, and we certainly want to make sure it's a well-rounded group. So please give thought to anybody else that you think would bring value to this body. Anything else in terms of old or new business? Next meeting
So,
is TBD.
yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be aiming for the late July, early August timeframe, roughly 3 months from now for our next meeting. So I'll probably send a doodle poll late June, early July to see what everybody's availability is and see if we can schedule it there in that late July, early August timeframe.
All right, thank you. I apologize. It looks like I've taken us over a lot packed into the agenda, a lot of value. I certainly hope in the next meeting that we'll get sometime on the agenda for an update on where we are with the infrastructure negotiations out of Congress, as it relates to the package that we're trying to advance for the region. So last call for any alibis. Hearing none, thank you, everybody, and we are adjourned.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.